established permanent representative of the Syrian Arab Republic.
شكرا سيد الرئيس مرة ثانية.
Mr. President, I thank you again for giving me the floor. I would like to thank those who spoke with neutrality and with reason about the situation in my country. As for the other colleagues who spoke falsely, whether knowingly or unknowingly, they have committed against my country and the Syrian people a moral aggression, a humanitarian aggression that adds to the suffering of the Syrian people. And allow me to share some comments in light of what we have heard so far. The suffering of the Syrian people is the result of a crisis that countries known to all, some of them have called for holding this meeting. They have spoken with enthusiasm about this meeting. They have fueled this crisis by providing all forms of support to foreign mercenary terrorists or by imposing unilateral coercive economic measures against the Syrian people. What we have heard in the statements of some representatives confirm our conviction that they have held this meeting not to assist the Syrian people, especially that some of them have participated in shedding Syrian blood. Is it possible that Israel, which is occupying the Syrian Golan for more than 50 years and for more than 4 years, has been providing all forms of support to al-Nusra Front in the area of separation of forces? Is it possible that the same Israel is concerned for the Syrian people and they are also among the countries that have called for this meeting? The same applies to Erdogan's regime. Is it possible that this regime is concerned for the Syrian people, while knowing that this regime is the main reason why citizens in Aleppo are suffering today, because they have opened the borders for thousands of foreign mercenary terrorists to overrun the city and take its citizens as hostages? Erdogan's regime has established training centers for these terrorists in Turkey, and this is the same regime that is calling for amending the Lausanne Convention signed in 1923, the same regime that is violating Syrian and Iraqi sovereignty, the same Erdogan regime whose Turkish military air force have yesterday killed more than 150 civilians in the countryside of Aleppo. How can the Al Saud regime claim that they are concerned for the Syrian people, whereas they have spent dozens of billions of dollars to fund terrorist groups all over the world, including in Syria and Iraq? The same regime where the sheikhs of strife have issued obscurantist jihadi Wahhabi fatwas in order to allow for shedding Syrian, Iraqi, Yemeni, Bahraini, Nigerian blood, including the city of New York, where Saudi terrorists have perpetrated the 9/11 attacks. How can the Al Thani Qatari sheikhs that have utilized the resources, their oil and their gas, in order to buy all types of weapons and send the same to terrorists? They have even sentenced a poet with life in prison because he has criticized the policies and politics of the rulers of Qatar. How can this Qatari regime be concerned for the Syrian people? How can any country that imposes a siege and unilateral economic measures against the Syrian people to claim today that they are concerned for the Syrian people? And how can member states in NATO, including Canada, who has called for this meeting and who is violating the basic principles of the UN Charter by violating Syrian sovereignty and claiming, along with other countries in the so-called coalition, that they are targeting terrorists on Syrian territory without the approval of the Syrian government? How can they perpetrate all these legal and moral violations? And how can the United States claim that they are concerned for the Syrian people, whereas they have spent hundreds of millions of dollars to train those that they call moderate Syrian opposition, whereas recent reports have shown that these opposition forces have joined or were members of armed terrorist groups. And recently, the United States have bombed sites of the Syrian army in Deir ez-Zor in order to provide a passageway for the terrorists of ISIS to cross over from Mosul to Raqqa in order to service cheap political agendas. Mr. President, I will conclude. How can France claim that they are concerned for the Syrian people, whereas from the very beginning of the crisis, they have supported armed terrorist entities and provided them with a political cover? They have even encouraged them to carry out the Ghouta massacre with chemical weapons. And France bombed civilians in Manbij in the countryside of Aleppo. The list is long and we cannot give you further examples today. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the distinguished permanent representative of Syria. We've run